Hey there, sophomores. Mr. McCauley here. What up, self-isolation? So, here's what we're going to do this week. It's going to be super simple. Nothing crazy. We're going to read chapters, I believe, 19 and 20. Yeah, 19 and 20. I'll read 19 to you. I want you to read 20 on your own. It's only like a couple of pages. And do your best to fill out the study guide. I get that this is hard and this self-isolation is miserable. It's a shelter-in-place order now, so it's like stay home unless you're going to get groceries or something. It's miserable. I mean, there's no way of getting around it. But if we all follow the shelter-in-place order, things will drastically get better. It's how China and South Korea started seeing their numbers change. China was a little bit more extreme. I mean, they were like quarantine, nobody can leave, or it's against the law. I don't think we're there yet in this country, but we really got to start paying attention to the orders because it's just vital that we stay away from each other to stop this spread. Now, people like, well, maybe not me because I'm getting kind of old, but yeah, people like me and you guys, we'll live through it. But the older people that we know and we love have not as good immune systems as us. So we need to do it for them. And it's the least we can do. I mean, it's like stay in your house and play video games and talk to your buddies online and stuff. I think we can handle it. So anyway, let's just get right into it. Chapter 19 of To Kill a Mockingbird. Thomas Robinson reached around, ran his fingers under his arm or left arm and lifted it. He guided his arm to the Bible and his rubber-like left hand sought contact with the black binding. As he raised his right hand, the useless one slipped off the Bible and it hit the clerk's table. He was trying again when Judge Taylor growled, "That'll do, Tom." Tom took the oath and stepped into the witness chair. Atticus very quickly induced him to tell us. Tom was 25 years of age. He was married with 3 children. He had been in trouble with the law before. He once received 30 days for disorderly conduct. Well, it must have been disorderly, said Atticus. What did it consist of? Got in a fight with another man who tried to cut me. Did he succeed? Yes, sir. A little. Not enough to hurt. You see, Tom moved his left shoulder. Yes, said Atticus. You were both convicted. Yes, sir. I had to serve because I couldn't pay the fine. Other fellow paid his'n. Dill leaned across to me and asked Jem what Atticus was doing. Jem said Atticus was showing the jury that Tom had nothing to hide. Oh, crap. I just lost my space. Were you acquainted with Miss Mayola Violet Ewell? Asked Atticus. Yes, sir. I had to pass her place going to and from the fields every day. Whose field? Well, I picked for Mr. Link D's. You were picking cotton in November? No, sir. I works in his yard fall and winter time. I works pretty steady for him all year round. He's got a lot of pecan trees and things. You say you had to pass the Ewell place to get to and from work. Is there anyone or any other way to go? No, sir. None's that I know of. Tom, did she ever speak to you? Why, yes, sir. I tipped my hat when I'd go by, and one day she asked me to come inside the fence and bust up a shipper robe for her. Now, here's a word. Shipper robe. A shipper robe is just like a closet that's not attached to the house. It's just a big dresser, basically. When did she ask you to chop up the shipper robe? Mr. Finch, it was way last spring. I remember it because it was chopping time, and I had my hoe with me. I said I didn't have nothing but this hoe, and she said she had a hatchet. She give me the hatchet, and I broke up the shipper robe. She said, I reckon I have to give you a nickel, won't I? I said, no, ma'am. There ain't no charge. And then I went home, Mr. Finch, and that was way last spring. Did you ever go on the place again? Yes, sir. When? Well, I went lots of times. Judge Taylor instinctively reached for his gavel, but let his hand fall. The murmur below us died without his help. Under what circumstances? Please, sir, Why did you go inside the fence lots of times?" Tom Robinson's forehead relaxed. "Well, she'd call me in, sir. Seemed like every time I passed by yonder, she'd have a little something for me to do. Chopping kindling, toting water for her. She watered them red flowers every day." "Were you paid for your services?" "No, sir. Not after she offered me a nickel the first time. I was glad to do it. Mr. Yules didn't seem to help her none, and neither did the children, and I know she didn't have no nickels to spare." "Where were the other children?" "They was always around, all over the place. They'd watch me work, some of them. Some of them set in the window." "Would Miss Mayella talk to you?" "Yes, sir, she talked to me." As Tom Robinson gave his testimony, it came to me that Mayella Ewell must have been the loneliest person in the world. She was even lonelier than Boo Radley, who had not been out of the house in 25 years. When Atticus asked had she had any friends, she seemed not to know what he meant, and then she thought he was making fun of her. She was as sad, I thought, as what Jim called a mixed child. White people wouldn't have anything to do with her because she lived among pigs. Negroes wouldn't have anything to do with her because she was white. She couldn't live like Mr. Dolphus Raymond, who preferred the company of Negroes, because she didn't own a riverbank, and she wasn't from the fine old family. Nobody said, "Well, that's just their way," about the Yules. Macon gave them Christmas baskets, welfare money, and the back of its hand. Tom Robinson was probably the only person who was ever decent to her. But she said he took advantage of her, and when she stood up, she looked at him as if he were dirt beneath her feet. "Did you ever," Atticus interrupted my meditations, "at any time go on the Ewell property? Did you ever set foot on the Ewell property without the express invitation from one of them?" "No, sir, Mr. Finch, I never did. I wouldn't do that, sir." Atticus sometimes said that one way to tell whether a witness was lying or telling the truth was to listen rather than to watch. I applied his test. Tom denied it 3 times in one breath, but quietly, with no hint of whining in his voice, and I found myself believing him spite of his protesting too much. He seemed to be a respectable Negro. A respectable Negro would never go up into somebody's yard without volition, with his own volition. "Tom, what happened to you on the evening of November 21st of last year?" Below us, the spectators drew a collective breath and leaned forward. Behind us, the Negroes did the same. Tom was a black velvet Negro, not shiny, but soft black velvet. The whites of his eyes shone in his face, and when he spoke, we saw flashes of his teeth. If he had been whole, he would have been a fine specimen of a man. "Mr. Finch, I was going home as usual that evening. When I passed the Ewell place, Miss Mayella were on the porch, like she said she were. It seemed real quiet like, and I didn't quite know why. I was studying why, and just passing by, and she says for me to come there and help her a minute. Well, I went inside the fence and looked around for some kindling to work on, but I didn't see none. And she says, 'Nah, I got something for you to do in the house. The old door's off the hinges, and fall's a-coming on pretty fast.' I said, 'You got a screwdriver, Miss Mayella?' She said that she sure had. Well, I went up to the steps, and she motioned me to come inside. And when I went in the front door and looked at the door, I said, 'Miss Mayella, this door look all right.' I pulled it back and forth, and those hinges was all right. And then she shut the door in my face. Mr. Finch, I was wondering why it was so quiet like, and it had come to me that there weren't a child in the place, not one of them. And I said, 'Miss Mayella, where are the children?' Tom's black velvet skin had begun to shine, and he ran his hand over his face. I said, 'Where are the children?' And she says that she was laughing, sort of. She says they all gone to town to get ice creams. She says, 'Took me slap a year to save up them nickels, but I done it, and they all gone to town.' Tom's discomfort was not from the humidity. 'What did you say then, Tom?' asked Atticus. I said something like, 'Why, Miss Mayella, that's right smart of you to treat them.' And she said, 'You think so?' I don't think she understood what I was thinking. I meant it was smart of her to save like that, and nice of her to treat them." "I understand you, Tom. Go on." "Well, I said, I best get going. I couldn't do nothing for her. And she says, yes, I could. And I asked her what, and she says to step on that chair yonder and get that box down from the top of the chifforobe." "Not the same one you busted up?" The witness smiled. No, sir, not another one. Most as tall as the room. So I done what she told me, and I was just reaching when the next thing I know, she grabbed me around my legs. Grabbed me around the legs, Mr. Finch. She scared me so bad I hopped down and turned that chair over, and that was the only furniture disturbed in that room, Mr. Finch, when I left. I swear before God. What happened after you turned the chair over? Tom Robinson had come to a dead stop. He glanced at Atticus and then at the jury, and then at Mr. Underwood sitting across the room. Tom, you swore to tell the whole truth. Will you tell it? Tom ran his hand nervously over his mouth. What happened after that? Answer the question, said Judge Taylor. 1/3 of his cigar had vanished. Mr. Finch, I got down off that chair and I turned around and she sort of jumped on me. Jumped on you? Violently? No, sir. She hugged me. She hugged me around the waist. This time Judge Taylor's gavel came down with a bang, and as it did, the overhead lights went on in the courtroom. Darkness had not come, but the afternoon sun had left the windows. Judge Taylor quickly restored order. Then what did she do? The witness swallowed hard. Well, she reached up and kissed me on the side of the face. She says she's never kissed a grown man before, and she might as well kiss an N-word. She says what her papa do to her don't count. She says, kiss me back, N-word. And I said, Miss Mayella, let me out of here. And I tried to run, but she got back to the door, and I had to push her. I didn't want to harm her, Mr. Finch. And I say, let me pass. But just when I say it, Mr. Yule yonder hollered through the window. And what did he say? Tom Robinson swallowed again, and his eyes widened. Something not fitting to say. Not fitting for these folks in Chillin to hear. What did he say, Tom? You must tell the jury what he said. Tom Robinson shut his eyes tight. He says, you goddamn whore, I'll kill you. Then what happened? Mr. Finch, I was running so fast I don't know what happened. Tom, did you rape Mayella Yule? I did not, sir. Did you harm her in any way? I did not, sir. Did you resist her advances? Mr. Finch, I tried. Thought about being ugly to her, and I didn't want to be ugly. I didn't want to push her or nothing. It occurred to me for the first time, in their own way, Tom Robinson's manners were as good as Atticus's. Until my father explained to me later, I did not understand the subtlety of Tom's predicament. He would not have had dared to strike a white woman under any circumstance and expect to live long. So he took the first opportunity to run, a sure sign of guilt. Tom, go back once more to Mr. Yule, said Atticus. Did he say anything to you? Not anything, sir. He might have said something, but I weren't there. That'll do. Atticus cut in sharply. What did you hear? Who was he talking to? Mr. Finch, you were talking and looking at Miss Mayella. And then you ran? I sure did, sir. Why did you run? Well, I was scared. Why were you scared? Mr. Finch, if you were an N-word like me, you'd be scared too. Atticus sat down. Mr. Gilmer was making his way to the witness stand, but before he got there, Mr. Link Dees rose from the audience and announced, I just want the whole lot of you to know one thing right now. That boy's worked for me for 8 years and I ain't had a speck of trouble out of him. Not one speck. Shut your mouth, sir. Judge Taylor was wide awake and roaring. He was also pink in the face. His speech was miraculously unimpaired by his cigars. Link Dees, if you have anything you want to say, you can say it under oath at the proper time. But until then, you get out of this room, you hear me? Get out of this room, sir, you hear me? I'll be damned if I'll listen to this case again. Judge Taylor looked daggers at Atticus, as if daring him to speak. But Atticus had ducked his head and was laughing into his lap. I remember something he had said about Judge Taylor's ex-cathedral remarks, sometimes exceeding his duty, but that few lawyers ever did anything about them. I looked at Jim, but Jim shook his head. It ain't like one of them jury got up and started talking, he said. I think it'd be different then. Mr. Link was just disturbing the peace or something. Judge Taylor told the reporter to expunge anything that had happened to have written down after Mr. Finch. If you were an N-word like me, you'd be scared too, and told the jury to disregard the interruption. He looked suspiciously down the middle of the aisle and waited, I suppose, for Mr. Link Dees to effect total departure, And then he said, "Go ahead, Mr. Gilmer." "You were given 30 days once for disorderly conduct, Robinson?" asked Mr. Gilmer. "Yes, sir." "What'd the N-word look like when you were through with him?" "Well, he beat me, Mr. Gilmer." "Yes, but you were convicted, weren't you?" Atticus raised his head. "It was a misdemeanor, and it is in the record, Judge." "I thought he sounded tired." "Witness will answer, though," said Judge Taylor, just as wearily. "Well, yes, sir, I got 30 days. I knew that Mr. Gilmer would sincerely tell the jury that any man who was convicted of disorderly conduct could have easily had it in his heart to take advantage of Mayella Ewell, and that was the only reason he cared. Reasons like that helped. What are we at, 15 minutes? "Robinson, you're pretty good at busting up shiffer robes and killing with one hand, aren't you?" "Yes, sir, I reckon so." "Strong enough to choke the breath out of a woman and sling her to the floor?" "Well, I never done that, sir." "But you're strong enough to." "Well, I reckon so, sir." "Had your eye on her a long time, hadn't you, boy?" "No, sir, I never looked at her." "Then you were mighty polite to do all that chopping and hauling for her, weren't you, boy?" "I was just trying to help her out, sir." "Well, that was mighty generous of you. You had chores at home after regular work, didn't you?" "Yes, sir." "Well, why didn't you do them instead of Miss Ewell's?" "Well, I done them both, sir." "You must have been pretty busy. Why?" "Why what, sir?" "Why were you so anxious to do a woman's chores?" Tom Robinson hesitated, searching for an answer. "Well, it looked like she didn't have nobody to help her, like I says. With Mr. Ewell and 7 children on the place, boy." "Well, I says it looked like they'd never helped her none." "You did all the chopping and work for sheer goodness, boy." I want you guys to pay attention to something real quick. I'm going to stop. Look at the way that Atticus speaks to Tom. He calls him Tom. He calls him by his first name. He's respectful of him. He lets him talk. He doesn't interrupt him. But then you have Mr. Gilmer, who's the prosecutor in all this. Mr. Gilmer calls him by his last name, not Mr. Robinson, just Robinson. And then, as the conversation continues, he starts calling him boy, which in itself is racist. But the difference between the two shows you how black people were treated during this time. Atticus is rare. Do you notice that Judge Taylor doesn't say anything about the way that Mr. Gilmer is speaking, Tom Robinson? Judge Taylor doesn't have a problem with Mr. Gilmer saying the N-word over and over. Mr. Gilmer doesn't respect Tom. Mr. Gilmer doesn't believe Tom because Tom is black, and that's the only reason. More racism of the 1930s South. Ooh. Oh, this book makes me mad every time. Back to it. Where was I? See, this is why I need you guys here. So you can be like, oh, you were here. Oh, right there. What? Oh, okay. Mr. Gilmer. Well, I tried to help her, I says. Mr. Gilmer smiled grimly at the jury. You're a mighty good fellow, it seems. Did all this for not one penny. Well, yes, sir, I felt right sorry for her. She seemed to be trying more than the rest of them. You felt sorry for her. You felt sorry for her. Mr. Gilmer seemed ready to rise to the ceiling. The witness realized his mistake and shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Why would him feeling sorry for her be bad? Should a black person ever feel sorry for a white person? No. It's odd. And when you look at this, Tom is just trying to be nice to Mayella. That's all he's trying to do. And you see the anger. I don't even know what you would call it. I don't know if it's anger. I don't know if it's astoundment that a black person has the ability to feel sorry for any white person, no matter how bad Mayella's situation is. And when you look at Bob Yule's explanation of what happened, it's very much that Tom was on top of her because Bob doesn't want people to think that his daughter was attracted to a black man. And likely Bob's the one that beat Mayella for doing it, for trying to kiss Tom. The witness realized his mistake and shifted uncomfortably in the chair, but the damage was done. Below us, nobody liked Tom Robinson's answer. Mr. Gilmer paused for a long time to let it sink in. Now, you went to the house, or by the house as usual, last November 21st, he said, and she asked you to come in and bust up a chifforobe? No, sir. Do you deny that you went by the house? No, sir. She said she had something for me to do inside the house. She says she asked you to bust up a chifforobe, is that right? No, sir, it ain't. Then you say she's lying, boy. That's could be another mistake. You get a black person calling a white person a liar? Atticus was on his feet, but Tom Robinson didn't need him. I don't say she was lying, Mr. Gilmer. I say she's mistaken in her mind. To the next 10 questions, as Mr. Gilmer reviewed Mayella's version of events, the witness's steady answer was that she was mistaken in her mind. Didn't Mr. Yule run you off the place, boy? No, sir. I don't think he did. Don't think? What do you mean? I mean, I didn't stay long enough for him to run me off. Well, you're very candid about this. Why did you run so fast? Well, I says I was scared, sir. If you were clear of conscience, why were you scared? Like I says before, it weren't safe for an N-word to be in a fix like that. But you weren't in a fix. You testified you were resisting Mayella. Were you so scared that she'd hurt you, you ran? A big buck like you. No, sir, I was scared I'd be in court, just like I am now. Scared of arrest. Scared you'd have to face up to what you did. No, sir. Scared I'd have to face up to what I didn't do. No, sir, I didn't go to be. Oh, wait a minute. What I didn't do. Are you being impudent to me, boy? No, sir, I didn't go to be. This was as much as I had heard of Mr. Gilmer's cross-examination because Jim made me take Dill out. For some reason, Dill started crying, and he couldn't stop. Quietly at first, and then his sobs were heard by several people in the balcony. Jim said if I didn't go with him, he'd make me. And Reverend Sykes said he'd go, or I'd better go. So I went. Dill had seemed to be all right that day. Nothing wrong with him, but I guess he hadn't fully recovered from running away. Ain't you feeling good? I asked. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, Dill tried to pull himself together as we ran down the south steps. And Mr. Link Dees was a lonely figure on the top step. Anything happening, Scout? He asked as he went by. No, sir. Excuse me. I answered over my shoulder. Dill here, he's sick. Well, come on out under the trees, I said. Heat got you, I expect. We chose the fattest live oak and we sat under it. It was just him I couldn't stand, Dill said. Who, Tom? That old Mr. Gilmer. Him doing him that way. Talking so hateful to him. Dill, that's his job. Why, if we didn't have prosecutors, well, we couldn't have defense attorneys, I reckon. Dim exhaled patiently. I know all of that, Scout. It was the way that he said it made me sick. Plain sick. He's supposed to act that way, Dill. He was cross. He didn't act that way when... Dill, those were his own witnesses. Well, Mr. Finch didn't act that way to Mayella and old man Yule when he cross-examined them. And the way that the man called him boy all the time, sneered at him, and looked around at the jury every time he answered. Well, Dill, after all, he's just a Negro. I don't care one speck. It ain't right. Somehow it ain't right to do him that way. Hasn't anybody got any business talking like that? It just makes me sick. That's just Miss Gilmer's way. That's just Mr. Gilmer's way, Dill. He does that all the way. He does them all that way. You've never seen him get good and down on one yet. Why, today Mr. Gilmer seemed to me like he wasn't even half trying. They do him all that way. Most lawyers, I mean. Mr. Finch doesn't. Well, he's not an example, Dill. I was trying to grope in my memory for a sharp phrase from Miss Maudie Atkinson's. I had it. He's the same in the courtroom as he is on the public streets. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean, boy, said a voice behind us. We thought it came from the tree trunk, but it belonged to Mr. Dolphus Raymond. He peered around the trunk at us. You aren't thin-hide. It just makes you sick, doesn't it? So, here's what I want you guys to do. For one thing, it made Dill sick and it made Dill angry because Dill doesn't think that anyone should be talked to like that. And Dill's right. But Scout has a hard time understanding why that upsets Dill so much because she's been around it all of her life. And really, Dill has been too. But Dill's starting to understand with his growing up that you can't talk to people like that. You don't talk to people like they're beneath you based on the color of their skin. So here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to read chapter 20 on your own and try to fill out the study guide for these 2 chapters. And I will talk to you next week. Remember, stay away from people, basically. So it's the way to say it. Do your best to stay away from people. Do your best to be very hygienic. Wash your hands a lot. Let's get through this stupid virus and hopefully we can come back to school. And if not, we at least need our summers. Okay. Have a good week, everybody. Macaulay out.